July 19th, 1989, Sioux City, Iowa. A United DC-10 is down beyond the runway, burning in broken ground and standing corn. Ambulances can reach part of the wreckage, not all of it. Within minutes, the rescue has a new problem. If the field cannot be opened, the survivors on the far side may as well be miles away. To understand why crawler tractors were pushing through Iowa corn instead of working a construction grade, go back to the afternoon of July 19th, 1989, United Airlines Flight 232, a DC-10 bound for Chicago from Denver with continuing service to Philadelphia, had suffered a catastrophic failure in its tail-mounted No. 2 engine. Fragments from that failure severed hydraulic lines in all three of the aircraft's independent hydraulic systems, a combination the designers had never expected to lose at once. By the time the crippled aircraft reached Sioux Gateway Airport near Sioux City, Iowa, the crew was no longer flying in any normal sense. They were steering with differential thrust alone, balancing one engine against the other, trying to guide a wide-body airliner that no longer properly answered its controls. When the DC-10 came down, it did not arrive on a clear stretch of pavement with room for orderly rescue access. It hit hard, broke apart, and scattered wreckage across the airport boundary and the agricultural ground beyond it. Fire rolled through sections of the debris field. Fuel burned. Parts of the aircraft came to rest beyond surfaces built for emergency vehicles, beyond the easy reach of ambulances, fire apparatus, and crash crews that needed direct access immediately. That matters, because in the first minutes after an aviation disaster, distance is not measured only in yards. It is measured in terrain. 100 yards across pavement is one thing. 100 yards across broken ground, drainage ditches, soft field margins, and standing rows of corn is something else entirely. The site around Sioux Gateway was not wilderness, but it was not a clean industrial apron either. It was a working landscape of runways, perimeter areas, farm ground, service roads, and uneven access points. The aircraft had come apart in the gap between where airport response was designed to function and where the wreckage had actually fallen. The machine problem appeared almost immediately. Wheeled vehicles could reach some portions of the site. They could not efficiently reach all of it. Heavy rescue units risked bogging at the margins or losing time trying to pick their way around ditches, embankments, and crop rows. Fire crews and medical teams needed lanes wide enough for repeated movement, not a single improvised crossing. The field itself was an obstruction. Corn in midsummer Iowa is not decorative cover. It is dense, tall, and arranged in rows that resist fast movement by men carrying gear, stretchers, hoses, and cutting equipment. What looked open from a distance became restrictive at ground level, so the operation changed. This was no longer only an airport crash response. It had become a ground access problem under mass casualty conditions. That is where the Caterpillar D7s entered the story. The D7 was not a rescue vehicle in the formal sense. It was a crawler tractor, a machine built for pushing, grading, clearing, and forcing a route where no route properly existed. Depending on exact series and setup, a late 20th century Caterpillar D7 weighed roughly in the range of 40,000 to more than 50,000 pounds. With the traction, ground contact, and blade capacity to cross terrain that would slow or stop conventional trucks. On paper, it belonged to earthmoving, not emergency medicine. On the ground that day, it offered something more urgent than specialization. It offered access. The reason matters. A crawler tractor spreads its weight across tracks instead of concentrating it through tires. In soft margins and disturbed ground, that changes everything. The machine does not need a finished road. It needs enough bearing surface to keep moving and enough room to bring the blade through. In cornfields, that blade could cut standing stalks, push debris aside, flatten irregular ground, and create a usable corridor quickly enough for the vehicles behind it to matter. The dozer was not there to work the wreck itself. It was there to make the wreck reachable. To understand why that became necessary so quickly, you have to understand the geography of the airport and the violence of the breakup. Sioux Gateway Airport sat in the flat agricultural country south of Sioux City. But flat from the air is not the same thing as simple on the ground. Airport perimeters are edged by drainage, fencing, service breaks, shoulders, and land not designed for rapid multi-vehicle penetration from every angle. Once the DC-10 left the runway environment and spread sections of fuselage, tail, and cabin across that boundary zone, responders were forced into a race against terrain as much as against fire. Survivors were in more than one location. Some were near recognizable sections of fuselage, others were farther out in the debris path. The scene was loud, burning, confused, and physically fragmented. Rescue workers needed to move inward with equipment and outward with the injured. That requires two-way traffic. It requires room to turn, room to carry, room to load, and room to keep doing it after the first pass. A narrow footpath through standing corn would not solve that. A bulldozed lane might. There is a tendency, looking back at major disasters, to imagine that every piece of response equipment arrives as part of a fixed plan. In reality, many of the most important machines arrive because someone on scene understands the physical problem before anyone has time to formalize it. The machine is called not because it belongs to the textbook, but because the ground has made a decision first. At Sioux City, the ground had made its decision. The wreckage lay where it lay. The crops stood where they stood. The emergency had outgrown pavement. If medical teams, firefighters, airport personnel, and mutual aid crews were going to keep reaching the far side of the debris field, the site needed artificial roads cut through it in real time. The D7s were heavy enough to do it, simple enough to keep working under pressure, and common enough in an agricultural and construction landscape that they could be brought in fast. And once they arrived, the task was brutally clear. Lower the blade, enter the corn, and turn a field into an access corridor before the window for rescue narrowed any further. Mechanically, the problem was not horsepower alone. It was visibility, traction, blade control, and judgment. A dozer operator pushing into a disaster field cannot simply charge ahead. The machine has to clear aggressively without destroying what crews may need to reach, preserve, or pass through. Ground conditions can change from dry rows to soft ditch margins in a machine length. Wreckage can be hidden. Fuel can be present. Emergency personnel can appear on foot without warning. Every pass has to open the route while keeping the machine under exact control. Now back to the site. By the time the crawler tractors began cutting their way through the Iowa cornfields, the wider rescue effort was already underway. Fire suppression, triage, evacuation, and scene control were unfolding at once. The D7s became part of that larger system in the most direct way possible. They did not replace ambulances or crash trucks. They made it possible for those vehicles and the people behind them to get where they needed to go. What followed was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was repetitive, physical, and urgent, which is exactly how real rescue access is built. The D7s worked by making the site legible. One pass knocked down corn. The next widened it. Another shaved high spots, pushed loose debris aside, and gave ambulances, pickups, utility vehicles, and foot crews a corridor they could use without fighting the field itself. In a mass casualty scene, that kind of work does not look heroic from a distance. On the ground, it changes everything. A patient carried 200 feet through standing corn over uneven soil arrives later, harder, and at greater risk than one moved along a cleared lane. The machine was buying time in the only currency available that day. Access. And access at Sioux City meant survival. United 232 remains one of the most studied aviation accidents in American history because 184 people survived an impact sequence that should have killed far more. The crew's use of engine thrust to retain partial control has been examined for decades. So has the airport response. But the rescue did not happen in the abstract. It happened across a wreckage field that had to be entered, crossed, and worked. That is where the crawler tractors belong in the record. They were not the center of the disaster. They were part of the reason the disaster remained reachable. The machine-centered lesson is easy to miss because bulldozers are usually associated with aftermath, not immediate rescue. They clear roads after floods. They push debris after landslides. They rebuild after fire. At Sioux Gateway, the timeline compressed. The same machine logic used in disaster cleanup was dragged forward into the rescue phase itself. The site had produced an obstacle course of crops, soft margins, scattered debris, and broken access geometry. The D7 answered that problem the way crawler tractors always do. It reduced terrain to something crews could work through. That decision makes sense only if you understand what a crawler tractor can do that a truck cannot. A wheeled vehicle depends on route quality. Even a capable truck loses efficiency fast when the ground stops behaving like a road. A crawler tractor does not ask for a road first. Its tracks distribute load over a larger contact area, lowering ground pressure and improving traction where tires begin to cut in, spin, or bounce. The blade then multiplies that advantage. It can remove the obstruction while the machine is crossing it. Corn, loose soil, shallow berms, field roughness, light debris, broken margins. Those are not separate problems to a dozer. They become one push problem, then one more pass, then another. In rescue terms, that means the machine can create the route at the same moment it uses it. That was the value at Sioux City. The D7s were not there to perform a symbolic role. They were there because the site had become a machine access problem, and crawler tractors solve machine access problems better than almost anything else on short notice. In the wrong place, a bulldozer is destructive. In the right place, under the right control, it is an instrument for restoring movement. On July 19, 1989, movement was the difference between an isolated wreckage field and a functioning rescue corridor. The broader rescue system around Flight 232 has rightly been remembered for coordination, speed, and the sheer effort of firefighters, medical personnel, airport staff, police, National Guard, and volunteers. That record deserves its place. But the physical side of rescue is often flattened in retelling. People speak of response as if reaching the victims were automatic once the alarm was raised. It was not. The field had to be opened, vehicles had to get in and out repeatedly. Equipment had to follow people. Patients had to be extracted from a site that did not present itself in neat lines. Now back to the machine. A Caterpillar D7 is large enough to matter and small enough to maneuver in places where a bigger tractor becomes clumsy. That balance likely helped on the airport boundary ground. Too small a machine would have lacked the blade and traction to cut useful lanes quickly. Too large a machine would have risked slower positioning, wider turning demands, and more difficulty working around responders and scattered wreckage. The D7 sat in the middle of that equation, enough steel to force a corridor, enough control to do it in confined, uncertain terrain. And that is an important part of why older crawler tractors remain so relevant in emergency work. They are mechanically direct. No one on scene needs a long explanation of what the machine can do. Start it, lower the blade, clear the route, keep it moving. In a chaotic environment, simplicity becomes operational speed. The aftermath at Sioux City eventually moved from rescue to investigation, removal, and reconstruction. Once the living had been reached and the injured evacuated, the site entered a different phase: documentation, wreckage handling, recovery of remains, and restoration of airport ground. Machines would still matter there. They always do. But that is not the part that gives this story its weight. The weight is earlier. It is in the moment when a bulldozer stopped being construction equipment and became part of a life-saving access chain. It is in the recognition that a cornfield at the edge of an airport could become as serious an obstacle as fire, distance, or debris. It is in the fact that the machine's contribution was not spectacle. It was utility under pressure, which is usually where the most important machine stories live. There is also something deeply American about this particular scene. A wide-body jet breaks apart beside an Iowa runway, and among the tools that help hold the response together are crawler tractors cutting lanes through corn, Not because anyone planned a symbolic image, but because the country's working landscape was full of machines and people accustomed to solving physical problems directly. The dozer did not arrive with ceremony, it arrived because someone understood the ground. That is why this machine story still matters. It shows that industrial history is not only about the great projects, the giant dams, or the fleets left behind in deserts. Sometimes it is about one class of machine crossing from its usual world into another for a few critical hours. A crawler tractor built to move earth ended up moving the boundary between reachable and unreachable. That is a smaller achievement than flying a crippled DC-10 to the runway. It is also indispensable in its own way. Survival after impact depends on what happens next. And what happened next at Sioux City depended in part on opening the field. The machines are gone from that rescue scene now. The corn grew back. The airport kept operating. The wreckage was removed. The investigations completed. The event folded into reports, memorials, and aviation training. But the ground problem that appeared that day remains worth remembering because it reveals something basic and true. When disaster leaves the pavement, rescue follows the terrain, and when terrain becomes the barrier, the machine that can make a road in real time becomes part of the rescue itself. If you appreciate machine history told at ground level, subscribe. That is what this channel is built for. And if you have worked crawler tractors around soft field margins, wreckage cleanup, or emergency access, tell us what stands out to you here. Because this was not the last time a bulldozer reached a disaster site before the formal plan did.